How's it going, everybody? My name is Alex, and you're currently getting a glimpse of the new podcast space. If you don't know, and if you don't know, it's probably because you're not following me on Twitter, which amazes me, by the way. We seem to have managed to get around 250,000 people to subscribe here on YouTube. Thank you, by the way, but only, not nearly that number of people are willing to jump over to Twitter and follow me there as well. But if you're not, then I don't know what you're doing, because that's where all the action's happening. And if you do follow me there, then you'll know that I'm going to be starting a podcast very soon, and it's very much in the works at the moment, but it's coming along strong. We've recorded an episode, and we've got some more in the works, so I'm excited for it. So that's what you're looking at here. But while I was sat here and while I'm still setting everything up, I wanted to bring to your attention a story coming out of Birmingham in the UK, and I wanted to discuss the nature of religious freedom and how far we should allow religious freedom, which of its own accord is an incredibly important right that I'd never wish to see taken away from anybody, but a discussion of how far we should allow the freedom, that is religious freedom, to infringe upon the education of children. And this is something that happens a lot, and this is something that this story just sums up perfectly. So I want to talk about the story, talk about what's going on, and then I also want to read you an article that I wrote, because the reason I know about the story, the reason it was first brought to my attention, was that my student newspaper has a page where it requests comments on certain stories, and they requested a comment on this story, and I immediately put myself forward and wrote an article. So I wanted to read that article to you in order to get this story a bit more attention and to get my response a bit more attention too. So let's take a look at the story that's so contentious and made me want to write about it in the first place, and then we can talk about what the problem is. Okay, so here's the story. Birmingham school stops LGBT lessons after parents protest. Hundreds of children withdrawn from Parkfield Community School for day. A primary school that taught pupils about homosexuality as part of a program to challenge homophobia has stopped the lessons after hundreds of children were withdrawn by parents in protest. Okay, so what's going on here is a school, in an effort to tackle homophobia, has started teaching kids about homosexual relationships, and because of that, some Muslim parents, who the school is predominantly Muslim, have taken their children out of school in protest at the fact that their children are being taught about homosexual relationships. That's the story. And this article is from earlier in the month, at the beginning of March, but there's been some updates recently. So it says here on Friday, and that was Friday at the time, on Friday about 600 Muslim children aged between 4 and 11 were withdrawn from the school for the day, parents said. The school would not confirm the number. The school made clear that it had never intended to continue the No Outsiders lessons this half-term, and confirmed that the lessons would resume only after a full consultation with every parent. Okay, this is where the troubles really begin. This is something that's actually working. The school has said that they're not going to continue the lessons teaching children about homosexual relationships and LGBT rights, until a consultation with parents has taken place. These are the parents who are taking their children out of school just because they're being taught about homosexual relationships. And now the school is bowing down and saying, actually, you know what, we're not going to continue to teach this until we're sure that you're happy with it. That's what's going on here. Parents have been protesting outside the Saltley School, which is rated as outstanding by Ofsted. At one protest, they held signs that read, "Say no to promoting of homosexuality and LGBT ways of life to our children, stop exploiting children's innocence, and education, not indoctrination." Remember that last one for later. Children from reception age, and that kind of means like kindergarten in the UK, through to year 6 were being taught 5 No Outsiders lessons a year, each one covering topics to meet requirements in the Equality Act. That's an actual act passed by law requiring schools to teach children about certain issues. And they've got a quote here from one of the first mothers to pull her child out of the school in protest. This is what she said. "We're not a bunch of homophobic mothers," she said. "We just feel that some of these lessons are inappropriate. Some of the themes being discussed are very adult and complex, and the children are getting confused. They need to be allowed to be children rather than having to constantly think about equalities and rights." But luckily, ladies and gentlemen of the UK, we live in a secular, liberal democracy, and if there's one place that we can be sure to turn to have the values of our liberal democracy reinstated and reaffirmed, it must be to our elected officials, our MPs. Well, let's take a look at what the MP for Birmingham had to say. Shabana Mahmood, the MP for Birmingham Ladywood, spoke out after parents in her constituency complained that primary schools were teaching their children about same-sex relationships. She said parents did not oppose sex and relationship education, but felt their children were too young for some of the things being taught. I'll remind you that those some things that these parents are objecting to are strictly LGBT issues. It's just the teaching of homosexual relationship that sparked these protests. So yes, they are actually opposing same-sex relationship education, because it's not just that there are some topics that they don't want them to learn about, it's LGBT issues that they don't want them to learn about. Speaking in a Commons debate, Mahmood said, "None of my constituents is seeking particular or differential opt-out at secondary school level. It's all about the age appropriateness of conversations with young children in the context of religious backgrounds." Like I say, I just love how we can rely on turning to our elected officials to reinstate the values of liberal democracy when they need to. I mean, it doesn't get more crystal clear an affirmation like that than a sentence such as, "It is all about the age appropriateness of conversations with young children in the context of religious backgrounds." Direct, to the point, we know exactly the values that are being reaffirmed, and we can rest assured that liberal democracy is being defended in the Commons. This is absolutely absurd. Look at what else she said. Mahmood, who has backed gay rights legislation in the Commons, as if that's supposed to give her any other credibility, as if that's not something that we should expect from our MPs anyway, including voting for same-sex marriage, said that the government should ensure the rights of minorities were protected, but that included the rights of people with orthodox religious views, including some Jews and Christians, as well as some Muslims. What do you mean, the rights of some Jews, some Christians, some Muslims? We need to respect the rights of all of these groups and to do so consistently. We can't say that we're going to respect some Muslims' rights, but by the very nature of you saying that, it's implying that we should give special treatment to certain groups in regards to how well their rights are protected, for the mere fact that they're a certain type of Muslim, let's say. This is not something that a secular democracy should be promoting. But okay, so now you know what's going on, I want to read to you the article that I wrote in response to this, and in response to the claim that these parents are really only protesting mature topics and sexual topics being taught to their children, and that it's not about homophobia. So here's what I wrote for my student newspaper. "I can hardly imagine this debate about homophobia taking place over an issue of similar mindlessness, such as racism. Picture a similar scene. Religious parents are protesting outside their children's school against the inclusion in the curriculum of books which feature interracial marriage. We're not a bunch of racist mothers," they claim. "We just feel that some of these lessons are inappropriate. The school decides that it will suspend its efforts against racial discrimination indefinitely until a, quote, full consultation has taken place with parents." Shabana Mahmood addresses the House of Commons saying, quote, "The government should ensure the rights of minorities were protected, but that includes the rights of people with orthodox religious views." This comparison I'm making serves to highlight the sinister nonsense that is on display in these protests. Any attempt to paint them as mere opposition to the presentation of mature topics to children is either grossly naive or positively deceitful. Unless you believe that parents pulling their children from school because of it teaching them about interracial relationships would be met with a similar charitability from the school or from the MP for Birmingham Ladywood, you must accept that these protests are not just about the complex and confusing nature of sexual and marital relationships, or a simple expression of the sacrosanctity that is religious freedom. They are indicative of an inexcusable prominence of homophobia and an inexcusably poor response to this from educational and political authorities due to their cowardly terror of coming across as religiously discriminative. It seems that those sharing in Mahmood's sentiment are too caught up in defending the red herring of some warped conception of religious freedom, even the legitimate version of which does not permit exemption from the Equality Act, too caught up in this to be in any position to defend the real virtue of sexual and marital equality. The religious views, which are, after all, those of the parent, not of the child, of any individual are not a sufficient warrant for the infringement upon the education of their children, especially given that the education of children is as much a societal issue as a familial one. The parents are not the ones who will suffer from the maleducation of their children. It's the members of sexual minorities in Britain who will bear its cost, coupled with a complementary culture of homophobia within a generation of religious children who were never allowed allowed to understand that they live in a country that is supposed to pride itself on its diversity of character. Religious freedom means more than just a parent's ability to bring up their children to abide by a faith tradition of their choosing. It also requires the child's ability to decide for themselves which religion, if any, to align themselves with. And this is not remotely possible if we allow them to be prevented from hearing ideas and facts that contradict the beliefs of their parents. It is the responsibility of a secular liberal democracy to ensure that all religions are permitted and accommodated, whilst none are given any more leniency than any other ideological proclivity. What would be the reaction if a parent cited their traditionalistic political conservatism as an excuse for preventing their child from learning about homosexual relationships? A parent has as much of a moral right to instill their religious views in their children by attempting to censor information about other ways of life as they do to instill their political views by the same means. That is to say, they have none. And I hope the irony of a parent doing precisely this whilst holding a banner reading "Education, not indoctrination" does not escape the reader. This is blatant, religiously driven homophobia that should be met with more disgust than could ever manifest itself in any parent at the thought of their innocent children being taught that gay people exist. To present it otherwise is to obscure the problem and thus delay its resolution. This is not and never has been merely an issue of parents not wanting to subject their children to mature sexual information. Someone once said, homosexuality is not just a form of sex, it is a form of love, and it deserves our respect and protection as thus. Thanks for listening. And as of yesterday, the controversy continues. We've got a story here from Sky News, and the headline reads, "Fresh protests over gay relationship lessons at primary school in Birmingham." So this argument is still going on. So let's see what some of the updated protesters are saying. So here's an excerpt from the Sky News article, the most recent one. They've quoted one of the protesting mothers as saying, "Our children are innocent. We just don't want their minds to be corrupted. Being Muslim and being homosexual, unfortunately, doesn't coincide together." Okay, so leaving aside the barbaric suggestion that to teach children about homosexual relationships is to corrupt their minds, as they put it, look at this quote again. "Being Muslim and being homosexual, unfortunately, doesn't coincide together." Okay, even if that's true, which I would argue that it is if you read the precepts of Islam, what does that matter? Okay, learning about LGBT issues, learning about homosexual relationships is not making these children become LGBT. It's not making them gay. That's not how any of this works. So yes, it may be true that the things that the school are teaching your kids about don't align with your religion, but that doesn't matter because they don't have to adopt these ideas. So you may well be right. Maybe your version of Islam really doesn't allow you to be a homosexual. But you don't need to be a homosexual to learn about homosexual relationships. That's just absurd. And even if, after hearing about homosexual relationships, a child then decides to identify themselves as gay, the reason for this, invariably, is not because they've heard about homosexual lifestyles, if that can be such a thing, and decided to adopt it themselves, is because they were already homosexual, but just didn't understand it, didn't know what was going on, and when they realized that there were other people like them, they were able to identify with those people as well. That's what would be going on, not people somehow being taught about homosexual relationships, the fact that they exist, and then deciding that that's what they want to do, that's the life they want to live. You don't choose this kind of thing. You don't look at a sexual orientation or become aware of its existence and say, you know, I might try that on for size. That's just not how this works. And even if you could choose your sexual orientation in a manner like that, that's the child's prerogative. It's their choice. It's not yours as a parent. Even if you could choose your sexuality, which I'll remind you, you can't. Even if you could, it's not your right as a parent to tell your children what they should believe. And that includes religious beliefs surrounding their sexuality. If they come out as gay, it's not your right as a parent to say that, well, you can't do that because I'm a Muslim. It's their choice to do so. If they want to be gay and a Muslim, that's their choice. If they want to be gay and renounce Islam, that's their choice. If they don't want to be a Muslim and they want to be straight, that's their choice too. And you as a parent can inform them, you can educate them, you can guide them. If you want to be a valuable parent, that's the job that you should have. But you cannot ultimately make the final decision for them. That's for them to make and them alone. And the only way that they can make that decision properly is if they're informed about all of the relevant issues, and that includes being educated about homosexual relationships. Look, here's another quote from one of the fathers at the protests. "We are Muslim," he said, adding, "We don't want that kind of education." Well, I'm sorry, but I don't want that kind of bigotry, and neither do your children, especially not if they turn out to be gay. And I don't particularly care if you disagree with me here, Mr. Father at the protest. I mean, I'm sure you'd be disagreeing with me if you were sat across from me right now. You're allowed to do so, and it doesn't matter to me. Like, I disagree with you, you disagree with me. You can hold whatever opinion you like on these issues, just as I can hold whatever opinion I like on these issues. But I'm not going to make that decision for my children. I'm not going to make that decision for your children, and you should grant them the same liberty to make that decision for themselves. And the only way that they can make that decision, like I say, is if they're informed about all of the issues surrounding homosexual relationships. They can't have an opinion on it unless they know what's actually going on. And another thing is that if you as a Muslim want to cultivate a society in which non-Muslims will look at you and say, you're different to me, you have a different religion to me and a different ideological viewpoint, but I still accept you as my friend and I still accept you as my neighbor, then by the same token, it's the same method that gets us there, gets us also to society that says that although you might be gay, I'm going to accept you too. And it works both ways. If you want people to be accepting as you as a religious minority, then you need to be accepting of homosexuals as a sexual minority. It's a two-way relationship, and the whole thing will break down if the cars are only moving in one direction, and we just can't let that happen. So, in short, let's ensure that we design society such that a variety of opinions can be heard and discussed and debated. But let's not do so in such a way that allows the mal-education of children, which is what is going on here, and certainly not for the excuse of religious freedom. And like I say, religious freedom is a right that every single person should be allowed to enjoy. But we cannot let this red herring of religious freedom, as I refer to it in the article, and I call it a red herring because this isn't religious freedom but a warped version of religious freedom. We cannot allow this to be used as an excuse to misinform our children or to not inform them at all. So thank you for watching, and thank you for listening to my article. I just wanted to let you know of what's going on here in the UK with regards to religious freedom, and in a context that I think can apply to anywhere in the world. You might not have been aware of this specific issue here in this country, but I'm sure you can think of at least one example of religious freedom being appealed to attempt to curtail the rights of others. And this should be part of a broader conversation on how far we allow religious freedom to be appealed to when it comes into conflict with other rights like this. But I want to know what you think. So leave me a comment in the description, especially if you disagree with me on this. I mean, maybe we should give these parents the right to have full control over the education of their children, and that includes bringing them up in their faith tradition and also choosing whether or not they should be exposed to certain facets of sex education. Maybe that's something you think, and if it is, then let me know in the description. But whether you agree or disagree, I hope that we can continue this discussion, and one way of ensuring that that happens is hitting the subscribe button, hitting the little notification bell, following me on Twitter, because that's where I'm really responding to people here. That's where I'm really having back and forth conversations rather than in the comments. So go follow me on Twitter and also on other social medias. And I appreciate you being here, appreciate you listening, appreciate the follow. And look out for the podcast. Like I say, I'm very excited to get it started up. But until then, thank you for watching this slightly different than usual video, and I'll see you in the next one.